I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey Lurkers, welcome to episode 54. Before we get started, I just wanted to throw out a little reminder that the voting for the Paranormality magazine's Top 10 Paranormal Podcast is ongoing. It begins the 21st of each month and then continues to the 20th of the next month. You can vote up to 3 times per email address at paranormalitymag.com/vote25. So if you have a couple minutes, please consider going and voting for Lurk. You can vote for us all 3 times. It allows us to be seen by people with similar interests, and we're always looking for ways to get more listeners to the podcast. I will make sure that I put that link in the show notes. For today's episode, we're going to be hopping across the pond once again to Ben MacDhui, the second highest mountain in Scotland. At least that's where we're going to be starting. This episode kind of had a mind of its own. It started out researching Am Fear Liath Mor, which is the Big Grey Man, also known as the Scottish Bigfoot. And that was the focus of the episode. And I was a little concerned that I wouldn't have enough material to really have more than about 20 or 25 minutes. And I'm really trying to get longer episodes. I'm researching Am Fear Liath Mor, and as I'm researching, all of a sudden it's, hey, there's a similar guy over here in Wales, and hey, there's this other creature, and oh, hey, by the way, there's one over here in Ireland. So this actually ended up Bigfoot type creatures in all of the UK. But we're going to start with Scotland. Back to Scotland and Ben MacDhui Mountain. It rises to a height of 4,295 feet and is the highest peak in the Cairngorm Plateau. The terrain is rugged with extensive boulder fields, corries, which are holes in the hillside of a mountain, cliffs, and buttresses at the peak. A buttress in this case is a very steep, sharp mountain ridge on the face of a mountain. The weather on the mountain is mostly cold and nasty. Still, many climbers make the trek up Ben MacDhui to take in the incredible views that can be seen from the summit. The terrain and the weather conditions aren't the most terrifying part of trekking up Ben MacDhui, however. That would be Am Fear Liath Mor, the Big Grey Man, or what some call the Scottish Bigfoot. Am Fear Liath Mor, or the Grey Man, first made headlines in 1925 when the Cairngorm Club Journal published a story recounting the tale detailed at that year's annual general meeting of the Cairngorm Club in Aberdeen by the club's honorary president, Professor John Norman Colley. Professor Colley was the first professor of organic chemistry at the University of London and a fellow of the Royal Society. He was seen as one of the most proficient and esteemed mountaineers of the time. His climbing experience ranged from the Himalayas to the Rockies. He was often described as shy and reserved with strangers, and would have been a shock to many when he recounted an experience he had on the summit of Ben MacDhui in 1891. That might seem like a big stretch in years from 1891 to 1925, but it's only 34 years. Here is the story Professor Colley told. I was returning from the cairn on the summit in a mist when I began to think I heard something else other than merely the noise of my own footsteps. Every few steps I took, I heard a crunch, then another crunch, as if someone was walking after me, but taking steps 3 to 4 times the length of my own. I said to myself, this is all nonsense. I listened and heard it again, but could see nothing in the mist. As I walked on, and the eerie crunch, crunch sounded behind me, I was seized with a terror and took to my heels, staggering blindly among the boulders for 4 or 5 miles, nearly down to the Rothiemurchus forest. Whatever you make of it, I do not know, but there is something very queer about the top of Ben MacDhui, and I will not go back there again by myself, I know. While Professor Colley's 1925 account was the first published account of Am Fear Liath Mor, the most famous account was detailed in the June 1958 issue of The Scots, as told by Alexander Tunian. Tunian had been climbing for 10 days in the Cairngorms in October of 1943, and reached the summit of Ben MacDhui. As the mist began rolling in from Lairg Grue, Tunian noted, I am not unduly imaginative, but my thought flew instantly to the well-known story of Professor Colley and the Fear Liath Mor. Then I felt the reassuring weight of the loaded revolver in my pocket. Grasping the butt, I peered about in the mist, here rent and tattered by the eddies of wind. A strange shape loomed up, receded, and came charging at me. Without hesitation, I whipped out the revolver and fired 3 times at the figure. When it still came on, I turned and hared down the path, reaching Glenderry in a time that I have never bettered. You may ask, was it really the Fear Liath Mor? Frankly, I think it was. Many times since then I have traversed MacDhui in the mist, bivouacked out in the open, camped on its summit for days on end in different occasions, often alone and always with an easy mind. For on that day I am convinced I shot the only Fear Liath Mor my imagination will ever see. So what exactly does this creature look like? It's said to be very large, about 8 to 10 feet tall. Its body is covered in short, coarse hair, and it has very broad shoulders. It's also reported that the creature is known to gesticulate wildly with long, ungainly arms. It is usually seen at the summit of Ben MacDhui in the Cairngorm Mountains, though there have been several sightings off the top of the mountain. But these aren't the only 2 sightings of the big gray man. When Professor Collier's story was shared with the public, he began receiving letters from others who had experienced something terrifying on the slopes of Ben MacDhui. Many had experienced feelings of sheer terror, and in some cases they had seen a large, dark shape coming towards them on the mountain. One of the letters was from a Dr. A.M. Kellis, who shared his experience on Ben MacDhui with his brother. According to Dr. Kellis, he and his brother had just managed to reach the summit, and shortly after they saw a large figure walking towards them. They were frightened, even with the large distance between them and the creature. They fled when the thing went into a dip, and they made their way down the mountain, not wanting to bump into the strange large creature again. One of the interesting things about the reports of Fear Liath Mor sightings is the common report of overwhelmingly negative energy. Feelings of despair and fear to the point that those experiencing it have feelings of wanting to commit suicide. There were some reports of people having a fleeting desire to jump off a cliff that was close to many of the sightings. The area is called Lairg Grue Pass. Though none of the reports mention anything the creature does that is harmful or aggressive, it seems to create an unshakable sense of dread, strong enough to make climbers flee back down the mountainside in fear for their lives. Some people also report the same eerie footsteps they hear following them, and witnesses are reluctant to return to the scene. One climber, Hugh D. Welsh, said that he hiked the summit with his brother in 1904. Throughout the night and day, they heard slurring footsteps as if someone was walking through water-saturated gravel. Both felt frequently conscious of something near them and an eerie sense of apprehension. In a 1939 book about climbing in Scotland by Alistair Borkwitz, he recounts 2 sightings by 2 separate climbers. In the first account, the climber was alone heading over Ben MacDhui on a night when the snow had a hard, crisp crust where his boots broke through with each step. He reached the summit, and it was while he was descending the slopes towards Larry Grue that he heard footsteps behind him that were not in rhythm with his own. He said, "I felt a queer, crinkly feeling in the back of my neck, but I said to myself, this is silly. There must be a reason for it. So I stopped, and the footsteps stopped, and I sat down and tried to reason it out. I could see nothing. There was a moon about somewhere, but the mist was fairly thick. The only thing I could make of it was that when my boots broke through the snow crust, they made some sort of echo. But then every step should have echoed, and not just this regular 1 in 3. I was scared stiff. I got up and walked on, trying hard not to look behind me. I got down all right. The footsteps stopped 1,000 feet about the Larrig, and I didn't run. But if anything had so much as said boo behind me, I'd have been down to Corroor like a streak of lightning." The second person's experience was almost similar. He was on Ben MacDhui alone. He heard footsteps. The person was climbing in daylight in the summer, but the mist was so dense that he was working by compass and visibility was almost as poor as it would have been at night. The footsteps he heard were made by something or someone trudging up the fine screes or loose gravel, which decorate the upper parts of the mountain. That wasn't extraordinary in itself. The steps were only a few yards behind him, but exceedingly odd when the mist suddenly cleared and he could see no living thing on the mountain. At that point, the area was devoid of any cover of any kind. When asked if the steps followed him, he said, "No, that was the funny thing. They didn't. They were regular all right, but the queer thing was that they seemed to come once for every 2.5 steps I took." In 1945, Peter Densham was participating in a rescue work in the Cairngorm Mountains during World War II. One day he reported hearing strange noises, mist closing in on his location, and increasing pressure around his neck. He fled before seeing anything concrete. A friend of Densham, also a climber, wrote about his sense of a presence utterly abstract but intensely real on the mountain, and heard an intensely high singing note a few years later in 1948. He also presented the encounter of another friend who wanted to remain anonymous. While this person was camped on Ben MacDhui, he reported waking up feeling an inescapable feeling of dread, and looked out of his tent to see a large figure with dark hair standing in front of the moon in silhouette. In 1965, investigators discovered 14-inch footprints on the slopes of Ben MacDhui, with a distance of nearly 5 feet between each step. In comparison, my husband is right around 6 feet. I think he's 5'11", but we'll say 6 feet. He has about a 3-foot stride. So 5 feet is pretty significant. Sightings continued through the 90s. It crossed train tracks, kept pace with cars, watched people from a distance, and in one instance spoke in a deep booming language similar to Gaelic. Hikers described it as 10 feet, then 20 feet tall, covered in gray hair, with long arms and a face that was human, yet not human. Its ears were pointed, and it has finger-like talons on its feet. There was a report that it wore a top hat. There was one report that it wore a hat. I don't know. Some have also reported hearing singing and ghostly laughter. Most reported an uncontrollable fear and sense of dread. Many of the sightings are more like sensations, sudden despair and panic. One day in the early 1920s, while coming down alone from Gruegek, which is close to Ben MacDhui, experienced mountain climber Tom Crowley heard footsteps behind him. When he looked around, he was horrified to see a huge gray mist-shrouded figure with pointed ears, long legs, and finger-like talons on its feet. He did not hang around for a closer look. And Wales also has something similar to the big gray man called the Grey King, or Brenin Siúd, or the Monarch of the Mist. And I know I just completely killed the Welsh pronunciation of that word, because it's already been proven that I cannot pronounce Welsh words with double L's. So I'm sorry. I've really done my best to try to learn the pronunciations. I seem to be relatively okay-ish with Gaelic. Welsh, not so much. Anyway, the Grey King is said to haunt a local mountain range, hiding in mountain mist on Snowdonia and Cadair Idris. He's a brooding, silent figure who lies in wait for unwary travelers who venture onto the mountain. Those who go missing are said to be victims of the Grey King. He's said to hunger for victims, and children were warned not to wander high into the hills, because Brenin Siúd would come at any time and carry them away. He didn't just appear in the mists, he also showed up in broad daylight. And there have been sightings of a gorilla-like creature recently in the Welsh countryside, so the idea of Bigfoot in the UK isn't really a reach. In fact, for centuries there have been stories of a creature called the woodwose, or wild man. Unlike Sasquatch, the woodwose is slightly smaller, around 6 to 7 feet. It is bipedal and has the appearance of a man with primate-like features. It has thick hair covering its entire body that is brown with orange or red tinting. There are not many stories about the woodwose, though there are illustrations of them dating all the way back to the 8th century. The woodwose seems to be more of a trickster and more like a member of the Fae or fairy folk than a primate. The reports that do exist mention that they had clubs, bowls, and crude bow and arrows. They sometimes raided small villages, stealing livestock and sometimes a young girl or two. There have actually been 2 recent sightings of the woodwose. In 1982, a 15-year-old girl was in the overgrown section of the local park in Lancashire, England, with her friends. They were skipping school when she and her friends noticed movement out of the corner of their eyes. Then, suddenly, a monster, ape man or gorilla man, jumped out of the bushes. After seeing the tall creature, she screamed and ran as fast as she could, pushing her friend to the ground, and she ran all the way home. She looked back after pushing her friend, only to see the creature lean back into the greenery. She recalled that the creature's face looked like it was confused and not aggressive like she expected. Her belief was that the creature was just as confused as she was. If you shove your friend to the ground, you're a little bit more than confused. Though, I'll be honest with you, my brother just about did that to me. He took off running from something he saw ghost hunting, and he picked me up and threw me out of his way, and he broke my glasses. So the girl said that the creature had amber-colored eyes, and its teeth were like those of a human, but more square. She's quick to say that it had hair all over its body, not fur. She was able to see the skin through the hair, though the hair was very thick. Another woodwose encounter in 1984 happened around 5 p.m. in Bouille Park. It was dark and freezing cold, and the woman was smoking a cigarette when suddenly some movement caught her eye. In a nearby street lamp, a 6-foot creature was illuminated. She remembers that the thing had bare feet, it had no clothing, and was covered all in hair. She first thought someone was pranking her, then realized something weird was going on. They stared at each other for 20 seconds before it quickly ran off into the trees. She ran home and told her boyfriend and brother what she had seen, but they scoffed at her and said it was just a local perv trying to pick up a prostitute. I really hate those pimp daddy Sasquatches that just roaming around the block looking to pick up a chick. There's a lot of really bad jokes here, but we're a family show, so I'm not going to share them. But also, the song Bigfoot Stole My Baby comes to mind. Look it up, you'll love it. She said what she saw was chimp-like, but was tall and very human-like, and that it looked like a caveman. She said it had a piggy-like nose and large black eyes. Interesting to note, Neanderthals had very wide, broad, almost piggish noses. In 2014, just outside Dorchester, 2 members of the British Bigfoot Research Organization investigated Yellowham Woods. During their 2-night investigation, where they spent time knocking and making vocalizations, they heard responsive tree knocks and something walking by their campsite. They also reported hearing whooping calls. Woodwose sightings are becoming as prevalent as Bigfoot sightings in America, according to some researchers. There was one Woodwose account I wanted to share, this one from Wales. A boy who was attending an outdoor school made the following report.
We were taught orienteering, finding our way in the dark through the woods, using a map and compass. So this night, we were paired up and given instructions on how to use them to navigate the woods at the back of the center. Me and my mate were first to set off through the woods. It didn't take long to get through, maybe half an hour, so we come to the path that leads back to the center down a steep slope. This is when something big came crashing through the trees and bushes to our right. Me and my mate just stopped dead still and looked at it. It was sort of roaring as I remember. It was like a huge black shadow. It was that fast. But you could tell it was thick and bulky. We just dropped our maps and stuff and ran like hell back to the center and alerted the staff to what just happened. The funny thing is, they believed us straight away and called the police. Not once did they show any doubt at what we were telling them, especially as my mate described it as a giant ape. The police questioned us very sympathetically and organized a search. I don't know what happened to all the kids about to follow us through the woods. In fact, we never really talked about it, strange as it seems.
With the Woodwose, there is mention of the Fae or fairy folk, also known as the Sidhe. I'll give just a brief insight here into them, though I do have this planned for a future topic. The Sidhe are a distinct race separate from humans, yet they have a lot of contact with mortals. They have powers beyond that of man, able to move more quickly, move through the air, and change their shape at will. The Sidhe are fierce guardians of their homes, and infringing on these places cause them to retaliate in an effort to remove people or objects that invaded their home. They often kidnap strangers or replace their children with changelings as punishment for the transgressions. In keeping with the Sidhe theme, there is an Irish creature called the Gruegek, which can mean magician, giant, or ogre, but actually means the hairy one. Within medieval literature, you can find many references to hairy man-like beasts, referring to orcs, ogres, trolls, wild men, and the Woodwose. Author Nick Redfern proposed that the Gruegek of Irish lore was in fact a Bigfoot or similar creature. The Gruegek, also called a Gruegek or Gelt, is described as a large bipedal ape-like creature that lives in Ireland. The creature appears in mythology around Ireland and is sighted only on rare occasions. Like the Woodwose, the Gruegek is said to be more human-like, and is depicted with small, wide, high-up nose, sometimes called piggish. It has a mostly flat face, a protruding brow ridge, and no sagittal crest. A sagittal crest is a crest on the skull of certain apes, like gorillas, that gives their head a conical shape. The creature is often compared to a Neanderthal, since the facial features are similar, though Neanderthals were only 4 feet tall on average, fully grown. Sightings have happened all over Ireland, though the highest concentration occurs around Slievenora Forest and Ballyboley. January 2016, an Irish Bigfoot researcher was walking her dog in the Slievenora Forest. A side note, That forest is also said to be haunted by the men killed when a U.S. Air Force B-17 Flying Fortress bomber crashed, killing 8 of the 10 people on board. So this researcher is walking her dog, and she notices her dog acting strangely. This had happened on other outings to the area. It wasn't until she got home and posted the photos that she had taken of the forest online that it was noticed there was a strange creature in her photo that was compared to the Gruegek. Then, on July 14th, 2017, around 4:30 p.m., a wildlife photographer and her husband went out to Sidhe forest. It was raining heavily that day, and they were walking their usual route when they heard a strange howling noise. They hadn't gone far into the forest before her German Shepherd began barking at the noise. At that point, the howl sounded close, but they couldn't pinpoint the source of the noise. A few seconds later, the noise stopped, then started again. The wildlife photographer said she had heard the noise before in the same area, but was alone with the dogs and doubted herself. She returned to the area with her phone, but didn't hear anything. She did see a double X made from large tree trunks, similar to things seen in other reported Bigfoot territories. Later, on another trip, she and her partner got the feeling that they were being watched. There are also some reports in Tipperary of wolfmen, though the modern sightings are of ape-like hairy humanoid creatures, not wolfmen. In 1997, 2 men claimed that they were in Ballyboley Forest when they heard what they called a loud flapping sound. They thought nothing of it and continued walking until they heard strange noises like a woman moaning in pain. They were horrified to find a group of trees thickly smeared with blood. As they ran off, one of the men claimed he saw 4 dark humanoid figures standing behind them, but not chasing them. In 1998, a woman working as a pet sitter and her husband were out walking dogs in Ballyboley. The dog walker and her husband approached a small patch of dead trees, and they claimed they saw what they thought was a human crouched down in the bushes. The dogs became agitated, and the creature raised its head, revealing it was not human after all. The woman says her husband approached the creature, who growled at him when he came too close. She told her husband to step back. The husband thought it was perhaps an escaped chimpanzee at the time, until he got within 15 feet of it, and the tall figure stood on its hind legs. They noticed the creature was carrying a large stick. The creature smashed its stick against a large tree, then ran off at a high rate of speed. The whole encounter lasted about 4 minutes. The woman described the thing as having a chimpanzee face, but with a broader nose. It was covered in dark brown, black fur, and was about 8 feet tall. Pimp Daddy Squatch back out there looking for hoes. Later that same year, a man claimed to have seen an ape-like creature using improvised eating utensils. The report came 1 week after a man claimed to have seen a similar creature in Suffolk, England. Overall, the biggest difference between these UK Bigfoot-like creatures and those seen in the US is that they lack the sagittal crest. Their heads are more human-like, with a human-shaped head, broad nose, a protruding brow ridge, a mouth that sticks out slightly like a chimp, and they're covered in hair. The hair color is varied, with most stating it had a reddish color, similar to an orangutan. So what is Am Fear Liath Mor? Some believe that it's a long-lost cousin to Bigfoot or the Yeti. Others suggest that it is an otherworldly guardian who protects a portal between the worlds on Ben MacDhui, something in the realm of the Sidhe. Another suggestion is a bodhisattva, which is one of 5 perfect men who have lived for billions of years and control the destinies of the world and meet once a year in a cave in the Himalayas. I don't really buy that because there's no such thing as a perfect man. Sorry. According to the group known as the Aetherius Society, one of the major alien spaceship bases in the UK is inside Ben MacDhui, so perhaps the creature is an alien protector of some sort. One of the more mundane explanations is a phenomenon known as a broken specter, where a person's shadow is reflected onto the mist, making it look like another person in silhouette. While I believe that this is a likely explanation for some of the accounts, it does not fit all of them. Because the specter is a shadow, it moves in the same way the person moves, and some of these reports have the creature moving towards them while the person is stationary. There were also reports of people seeing this figure standing while they actually were inside of a tent. So what do I think? Personally, I believe there is a creature seen throughout the world that is an actual living, breathing creature like Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, the skunk ape, the yowie, etc. You know where I'm going with this. In a 2010 paper, it was mentioned that scientists have classified 1.7 million species of animals, and it was estimated that that number is only 1/4 of all species on the planet. If that was correct, there are 5 million undiscovered species still out there, which makes me think a primate-like creature is not out of the realm of possibility. I also wanted to touch on the strange feelings of terror and panic that witnesses experience. I looked into which animals emit infrasound. Infrasound is a low-frequency sound that cannot be heard by the human ear, but can be sensed. It can cause feelings of fear, sorrow, coldness, anxiety, and shivers down the spine. Elephants, rhinos, whales, and giraffes are some of the animals that communicate with infrasound. Out of curiosity, I looked up information about gorillas and infrasound, and learned that University of Arizona primatologists discovered that gorillas also use infrasound. Is Am Fear Liath Mor a type of primate using infrasound that causes these seemingly unexplained feelings of terror? Then again, it's probably the Fae or the Sidhe trying to keep your ass out of their houses. So that's going to do it for this episode. You can find Lurk on your favorite podcast listening platform or at lurkpodcast.com, where all the episodes are available along with links to our social media. If you have a moment, please consider giving us a 5-star review. It helps us be suggested to people with similar interests. And until next time, keep lurking.
This is by Ethan Molyneux. Thank you. Good night.